Hi, I am Nikki Soda, the Membership Development Officer for NAATP. And in continuing with our membership month, we have the privilege of having Jerry Schwab with us today. He is the President and the Chief Executive Officer of High Watch Recovery, which celebrated a huge milestone last year of having 80 years. And I had the privilege of being able to go to High Watch Recovery last year and to help with a little part of the celebration and see firsthand the stellar work that they are doing. So thank you, Jerry, so much for taking the time to visit with us today. Why don't you start with telling us just a brief history of High Watch Recovery, if you don't mind?
Thanks, Nikki. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today, and thank you and NAATP for the work you folks are doing on keeping us all up to date on what's going on nationally. And it's a great opportunity to work and see what other people are doing. So I appreciate these videos that you're doing. So High Watch Recovery Center is formerly known as High Watch Farm. Big Book was published finally in the spring of 1939, and then High Watch was founded in the fall of 1939. High Watch was a spiritual retreat for many years before it became a facility that treated those with substance abuse. Originally, it started out as treating just alcoholics. But Bill, Wilson, Lois, Marty Mann, some of the founders came up here in the fall of 1939 and met with a woman by the name of Sister Frances, who was our original founder. And High Watch had began to attract over the years people that were searching for cures of alcoholism. Ultimately, is what a lot of alcoholics came up here to do. And it was a working farm. When Bill came up here in the fall of 1939, he met with Sister Frances and Marty Mann, and at the end of their long weekend, Sister Frances gifted the farm to what at the time was the Alcoholic Foundation. And Bill, following the tradition, said that AA can't own any property, but the exact quote that is recorded in our archives was that he said, "We would use it if you let us." So some of the founding members went on the High Watch board back then, and it really just became a retreat at the time, what they referred to back then as one of the first drunk farm. And they used it as a retreat at the time to bring people up here. They'd come up here for a week or 2 weeks, and they'd teach them the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it gave them a respite from what they were going through at the time.
Very nice. And Jerry, one of the things, you guys have an extremely powerful video that Marty Mann narrates, and what we're going to do is we'll have a link to that video. That way everybody can be able to click on it and watch it, because if you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to check it out. It is extremely moving and gives a great recap.
Yeah, it's great to hear Marty herself tell the story of how High Watch came to be. So it was we're lucky to have it.
Yeah. So shifting gears just a little bit, can you remember the first time that you heard about the National Association or your first exposure to it?
High Watch has been here 81 years now, has been a member of NAATP since before I worked here. So, High Watch has participated for a long time. And the first event I attended was the national conference
Nice.
in Colorado. As an employee here, it was really my first national event, so it was really great to be able to network and meet with other people from around the country. A lot of people knew the history of High Watch, and I was able to learn kind of what other facilities were doing. It was a wonderful event.
And I was there too, so I'm sure our paths crossed, and we just didn't know each other at that time in Denver. What would you say, Jerry? So as you've moved into the role of CEO, what's a benefit that you can say that NAATP has offered as High Watch as a member? So being a CEO, what is the benefit that you see?
Two main things jump out to me. One is the ability to see what's going on with the industry trends, where care is going, where we can improve upon, networking with my colleagues from around the country, and really kind of understanding the challenges of what they're going through. It really helps me from the perspective of, the best things to do, best practices, things to avoid. I've really gotten a lot out of my colleagues from around the country on, different business practices that make sense, things to look out for. But the thing that's really stuck out for me is, when I first came into this industry, I was really surprised about a lot of the kind of pop-up newer facilities that were coming into the industry. And it appeared to me, as kind of being a newcomer, that NAATP really took the initiative on really laying out some guidelines for ethics on what's appropriate, and really kind of led a charge on creating a standard for the country on what's appropriate ethical business practices, what's ethical treatment practices. So I was thoroughly impressed at some of the initiatives you folks have done over there.
No, that's very good to hear. And Jerry, one of the nice things about the association too is that we have longstanding members like you that we're able to get suggestions from and have look at, for example, our code of ethics and say, you know, this should be modified, or we've been doing things this way. And so it's really nice to have long established members like High Watch Recovery to be able to bounce ideas off of. So for that, we're grateful for your membership. One of the other things that I wanted to go back to is, could you talk a little bit about what you guys have done in response to COVID-19? As I mentioned before, you have really been at the forefront, and I've heard some of the great things that you guys have done. And so do you mind talking a little bit about the cabins you guys have put into place and your testing procedure that you've done?
Yeah, early on, back in March, we had an existing cabin location on our property. We installed another cabin location, modular building, and we put a protocol in place early on. We were able to secure an agreement with a lab that could give us basically 24-hour turnarounds. It depends. Sometimes it's a little longer on the weekends with UPS and shipping and some of the issues. Nobody gets 2-day Amazon deliveries anymore.
Right.
So same goes for COVID tests. So we're able to secure the antigen test, the nasal swab test with a lab that was reputable. We were also able to secure some antibody tests so we could test folks to see if they'd been exposed to the virus and had the antibodies. But it was more important for us to get the nasal swab testing in place. So what we did is we increased our screenings. So we would screen people out if we felt they weren't appropriate to be up here. History of fevers, being sick in the last 14 days, things like that. So we did increase our screenings early on, and we put a practice in place where the guest was basically somewhat admitted in the parking lot. There was a pre-screening done by our nursing and medical team with them in the parking lot, and then they would go into the welcome cabin, basically an isolation area where they would be nasal swab tested, and they would stay in that location until those results came back to ensure that they weren't infectious. We wanted to make sure while the person was in there, they weren't just in isolation and quarantine, that they were getting treatment while they were in isolation. And it's, often many of us refer to addiction as a disease of isolation. So it was, we really wanted to make sure the person didn't feel too isolated when they were in there. So we equipped our group rooms with audio and visual capabilities. We installed audio visual capabilities in the cabin so that the guests were able to participate in the groups that they would be in ultimately when they were released. So they were in treatment from the second they came on campus. Wasn't the most optimal situation, but we were making the best of it.
Sure.
So we were able to make sure that the community was safe and that we were bringing people in that were virus free, and that the person who was in isolation was getting treatment and not just being isolated. And it's worked. I mean, we've had a number of cases. We've had a few cases of people that did test positive that were in isolation, and we handled those appropriately so that they didn't get the community infectious. And we've also learned a lot along the way of
Sure.
how long, then what do you do with the rest of the people that were potentially exposed to that person? How long do you hold them? That's why we had gotten the second trailer, because we have to quarantine people for a longer period of time, retest them. So we've had some interesting experiences along the way, but knock on wood, we haven't had any virus related issues in the community.
So we are very, very grateful to have High Watch Recovery as an NAATP longstanding member. And thank you, Jerry, for the work you and your team are doing.
Same to you. I appreciate all the work that you folks are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have that video again, the link for Marty Mann's video at the end of this. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nikki.